So the passages that we read today are interesting in a couple of ways, and they have some similarities. Maybe you've guessed it. Both of these passages are about someone who has led a group of people who is now going to say goodbye. Did you notice that? In the story of Moses, there's the story of him giving Joshua the reins as he is now going to take the Israelites into the promised land, to which he is forbidden to go. The story behind that is kind of long, and I won't go into it. He hit a rock a couple of times and thought he was real powerful. Supposedly, that may be a part of the reason why God doesn't allow him to enter the promised land with the rest of the people. I don't know about that. I think of Moses as a person who had gifts for the right time and the right place. And that maybe his gifts weren't the right ones for the next place. Jesus, in the other story, seems to kind of know what's coming. He's aware that there's a choice he made at some point to come into Jerusalem, to be in the face of the powers, and to be in that place is to know in his day and his time that his capacity for continuing was going to run into a wall at some point. And he sees Judas, and he gives Judas permission to do what he needs to do. And in that process, Jesus says a couple of things. He says a couple of things to the people there. I struggled with this for a moment because I thought, well, maybe what we should focus on is what he said. Because what he said is so beautiful. It's basically saying to those who have, in some ways, risked their lives with him to walk an edge in a culture to which they were bringing a new paradigm. And his words are, if you love me, then you'll love each other. And that's how people will know that you knew me, or that you were my friends, is that you love each other. And so I thought about, like last week, maybe just have another big love fest down here. We could wash some more feet. Chuck could wave a towel. And then I thought, no, there's something else going on here that I would too easily want to deny. Because grief is something I have discovered in my life I am too good at avoiding. I'm too good at it. I've been good at it since I was a kid. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross talks about the stages of grief. She's kind of that most of us have heard at some point. This idea that in all of our lives, we're going to go through moments of letting go, of emptying out, and there are stages both to our own passing and to the passing of others that seem to be fairly common. Maybe we don't go through them in the same kind of order. Maybe we approach them in different ways, but she talked about that the first stage of grief is often denial. Denial is what I see in the disciples of Jesus as they hear him giving Judas the instructions, as they sit knowing surely at some level in their heart that this just can't go on. There's a denial often for me in just trying to avoid the endings. It's true, we don't like endings. There's even research that suggests we are much better at keeping up with the stuff we're getting than the stuff we're losing. Maybe that's an emotional thing because the stuff we're getting makes us feel good, and the stuff we're losing we'd rather not have to feel. But it's a part of the journey. A friend of mine, a psychologist in Houston years ago, used to do a big seminar on being good at endings and beginnings. And he said, you might as well learn to get good at endings and beginnings because that's the majority of life. Gary David, my friend in California, who has been a mentor, this kind of great mind in the world of epistemics, suggests that stability is the most uncommon thing on the planet. Change is the constant. So we're always in this swim of change, and how do we embrace it? How do we walk into it and hold it and let it be? The second stage of grief that Kubler-Ross talks about is anger. And she says, often when we go through loss or when we face our own loss, we want to rage at it. We want to rage at, why me? Why this? Why now? Have you ever been there? Often we want to look for someone to blame. The surgeon, the boss, whoever, as a way to somehow push back the sadder feelings that we would otherwise have to embrace. It feels much stronger and much easier to find someone to blame and an enemy to point to. Grief means we have to go through all of that. Then she talks about a stage called bargaining. Let's see if we can make a deal. Let me see if I can make a deal with life, that I don't have to go through a loss. I've spent plenty of years counseling couples through divorces to know how often this becomes a big, prolonged stage in a process of change for a couple or for an individual, where there's a hope that somehow if I could just change this or change that, somehow you would still want me, or that things might be okay. Unfortunately, they more often than not end up discovering that the emotional distance that's grown between them is an emotional divorce that had long ago happened for one of them. It just hasn't happened yet for this one. The journey of life involves many, many times of our embracing what is coming in the door, a calling, a new beginning, a new relationship, and then a new year. But there is nothing about life that isn't temporary. It seems woven into the fabric of the experience. Isn't it a better choice to somehow embrace that and maybe even see it as beautiful? Maybe even see it as a part of this sacred gift of life that would not be the same were it always permanent and unchanging. The gift of a person in our lives is a gift for a season. To be able to own that is to be able to value it in a way that constancy somehow doesn't allow. And valuing things opens us up to the possibility of seeing our lives with gratitude rather than simple expectation and entitlement. And what is life not lived with gratitude? Meister Eckhart once said, if the only prayer you ever pray is thank you, that's enough. Kubler-Ross then said, there's another stage. She called it depression. There is something of a falling into that. At some point in our lives, as we do those moments of letting go, we have to embrace the rivers of energy that have flown in one direction for long periods of our lives begin to retract. And we can often find ourselves in kind of a stagnant place. Where will my energies go now? And in that stagnancy, often people get stuck. That stagnation can breed all kinds of attempts to avoid the feelings, and we go back and up and down the ladder of all of these different kinds of ways of dealing with grief, the other stages, until eventually we come to that final stage of acceptance. Acceptance is not just acknowledgement, Kubler-Ross says. It's about a full experience of the loss and an openness to its meaning. I wonder what it would mean for the disciples if they might have been able to, at those moments where Jesus was about to depart, to become a little bit more awake to this process going on inside themselves. Maybe Peter wouldn't have struck out with his sword to cut off the ears of the guards who came to arrest Jesus. Maybe they would have found words to say, that they would have felt a greater sense of connection through the whole thing. It's hard to find words in the face of grief. I know it all too well. This is a silver dollar. My grandfather gave it to me before he died. It's from 1921. He called me, and I came to visit him on his porch at his house. My grandmother sat across from us. I didn't know for sure he was going to die. I was about to leave for college, and I knew he had been ill. He had cancer. And my brother and I had gone to give blood, to have a blood bank for him for a surgery that he was going to have. And we sat on the porch and visited for a few minutes about me going to college. And then he said to me, "I've got something I want you to have." And he gave me the silver dollar. And then he gave me his rain suit.
Do you still have it?
No. Got this. The rain suit would have helped me today more than this. But it was kind of a weird green, very old plastic rain suit that he would wear when he would play golf. And I had no real use for the rain suit. As a college student, 1976, didn't fit with my wardrobe, which would soon be a leisure suit. So, I don't still have the raincoat. But what he said to me when he handed me the raincoat, and he teared up, he says, "You know, I must love somebody an awful lot to give them this." And I didn't cry. And my grandmother immediately stopped him from crying. Our family wasn't all that good with grief. But my grandfather, who had a lot of Cherokee, he was a great-grandson of a Cherokee chief, said, "I love you." The last time I saw him was in the hospital. He was about to go in for surgery. I didn't get to see him after surgery because I had to go back to school. But I wanted to see him before I left. And my grandfather, who was a stately, wise gentleman from Mississippi, had taken out his teeth and was making faces at me. I think because he wanted me to know, again, I love you. I didn't have the words to say to him. I didn't know what to say. I filled books, pages of what I needed to say to him, later. But what it makes me remember, and as I read these passages, what I think of, is that our experience is always now. It's always right here. And it's always changing. It's always on its way somewhere else. What is it that you would say if you were leaving? If you were passing on? What would you pass on? If you had one sentence, like Jesus did in this passage, to say, what would you want others to carry on from your life? Maybe Eric Fromm is right when he says we can't fully live until we've fully dealt with our own temporality, our own temporariness, our own deaths. We are only here for a while. Where is it that we are in tune with what it means to pass on something? I have this silver dollar, which I could give away right now, because it's just a silver dollar. What I value about it is it reminds me of a moment where my grandfather found the words. What are your words? What are our words? I want to invite you to just maybe meditate on that for a moment and consider that idea. And just as a moment of prayer, allow that question. If you were in the last days of your journey, what would you want to say to the people around you? And most of all, what would you want to say about the truth that you've learned that you would want someone to carry on? Seems we only have a couple of choices here. We don't get to change the fact that life is all full of temporary. We don't have a choice not to have moments of grief. But maybe even in the midst of that, we can tune into the gift. It's such a wondrous thing to have a life. Maybe the temporary nature of everything reminds us of its preciousness. If you could say one sentence that would carry on forever in the hearts of other people, what would that one sentence be?